Bibliophiles of the internet, my name is Audrey, and today I'm here to introduce what I guess is a reading vlog where I read about queer sports. Let it be known that I had no intention of making this video, but I realized that the two books I had started were accidentally on theme, and since queer sports is a huge part of my brand, I figured why not just vlog the experience. The first book I've started is one I'm actually reading with Jocelyn, who deserves all your love and attention, and we are reading our advanced copies of Anna on the Edge by AJ Sass. This is one of my most anticipated releases of 2020, and I was just biding my time waiting for the right moment to email Little Brown and be like, you not letting me read this book early is a mistake. Thankfully, they saw things my way and kindly sent this along, so thank you very much, Little Brown, for young readers. You're the real ones. It's an Own Voices queer middle grade contemporary story about Anna, who's a figure skater pretty much full-time, like they're homeschooled and everything, and when the story starts, they're finally moving from the juvenile division to intermediate. So they're moving to a new rink and starting to work with new people, and Anna has never been a dainty, frilly dressed kind of skater, so all this newness is causing them some anxiety because it seems like their new program is centered around this idea of them being a princess. On top of that, Anna comes into contact with a young trans skater for the first time in their life, and I think that relationship is going to challenge the way they see themselves, especially in such a distinctly gendered sport. I do want to mention that I'm using neutral pronouns for Anna because I don't know what their pronouns are or what they will be by the end of the book. And the story is actually written in first person present tense, and as I've been very carefully reading through the story, I'm noticing that there's really no use of pronouns in regards to Anna so far, so to be safe and respectful, I'm going to just stay neutral and wait. It's also worth mentioning that Anna is Chinese American, possibly with some Hawaiian heritage as well, and they're also Jewish, which you don't get to see that often, so that rep is also present in this book. As of filming this clip, it's our second day with this book, and I'm really enjoying it so far. The writing itself is not especially stylized, it's more functional and operating on the level of character development and introspection, which is what I think the story needs. One of the relationships that stands out the most is between Anna and their mom, who's a single parent. There's a level of respect and transparency between them that's really refreshing to see, especially because Anna's mom makes no secret of how expensive it is to be a competitive skater and how many jobs she has to take on to make it work. There's an acknowledgement of how competitive skating is so deeply embedded in wealth and how the wealthiest skaters get the most resources and the most opportunities, so Anna and their mom have to be creative with how they go about it. I was telling Jocelyn that in your prototypical middle grade story, the conflict would be about how the parent is struggling but desperately trying to hide it, and then the young protagonist would sense that something's off but not know what to do about it, but in Anna on the Edge, that is definitely not the case. I appreciate that so much, and I'm also really fascinated by one of Anna's fellow skaters, Faith, who's kind of like a gender foil for Anna. Faith has such an easy relationship with being feminine and showcasing that femininity to the choreographers and the judges in a way that's expected of female skaters, and Anna is really struggling with those same exact expectations. There's also these really subtle markers of gender dissonance in Anna that I've been paying very close attention to, like how they do a mental double take when their mom uses their full name when they just want to be called Anna, or how they hate wearing practice skirts or having costumes with skirts, how they cringe when someone calls them Miss, and even how they're intimidated by Faith's performance abilities in some ways. And when they first hear about this young trans skater, Hayden, they become super fixated on the fact that you can tell people to call you a different name and use different pronouns, and that's like allowed. Anna is so drawn to that concept in ways they can't even explain. They don't even have the words to describe why it matters so much, which is hashtag relatable and incredibly realistic. So I'm excited to hopefully see a friendship form between Anna and Hayden and see how that challenges how Anna understands their place in this sport. And the other book I started, because apparently I love doing too much, is my arc of Fence Striking Distance by Sarah Reese Brennan with illustrations by Joanna the Mad and adapted from the comic series written by C.S. Pacat. Again, unintentionally, this is also a book I requested from Little Brown. This is not a sponsorship. This is not a partnership. Nobody asked me to do this. It's just a coincidence. But also, good on you, Little Brown, for bestowing upon us all the queer sports in 2020. This is a YA novelization of the Fence series, which is obviously quite queer, and I think in terms of timeline, it actually takes place right after Volume 4. So if you're wondering whether you should read the comic series first, there's enough recap built in that I don't think you necessarily have to, but I also think you might get much more out of it if you are familiar with the series. And also, if you are reading the series, you should definitely read volume 4 first to avoid getting spoiled on a few things. But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's take a step back and give a general overview of the Fence series. Fence is basically about Nicholas, who's the illegitimate son of a retired champion fencer, and he's always been on his own. He's scrappy, he's rough around the edges, he's not super well off, but he's finally gotten a scholarship to help him attend this prestigious academy called King's Row. The scholarship is contingent on him making the fencing team, so that's where his focus is, but he's also just found out that his ultimate rival is also going to be his roommate. So the novelization is not only from Nicholas's point of view, and it's about how Coach Williams wants the fencing team to bond and become more supportive so they can grow, and so she's going to assign them a series of highly embarrassing team building exercises. As someone who freaking loves the Fence series, this book has been such a treat because you get to see the perspectives and hear the voices of characters who don't usually get too much page time in the comic. It's also kind of weird, but also nice to see these characters in a longer form story because comics are so efficient and so limited in what they can show, so I feel like I'm seeing more of their personalities come through. Sarah Reese Brennan has such an eye for comedic tone and timing, and she's so good at building the relationship dynamics between close friends. So it's fun to see how she's navigating this group dynamic, but also focusing in on specific relationships within that. So I'm really intrigued to see how many perspectives we're going to get and how the story is going to function as connective tissue within the rest of the series. But yeah, it's super funny and engaging so far, and I'm really excited to see what happens next. I think I left off on a Nicholas/Seiji chapter, so very excited about that. Alright friends, so it is day 2 of the vlog, and Jocelyn and I have now passed the halfway mark in Anna on the Edge, which is a very exciting development. So again, really loving the subtle gender stuff happening in the story. It's so clear that Anna doesn't have the vocabulary to express himself and explain why things are hitting them a certain way, which I think is so true to a young person's experience. Especially when it comes to kids, in most cases, they don't know what labels exist. They aren't familiar with inclusive terminology. They don't have the right words for everything, but they do know enough to understand when something about them doesn't fit. There's actually a moment where Anna is accidentally mistaken as a boy by Hayden, and they have this moment where they're like, wait, I'm not a boy, but also I don't hate that. That moment really hit for me as a trans masc NB because being mistaken as a man or being manly doesn't really bother me. It's not entirely right, but it feels so much better than the alternative. So Anna having that brief space where they can sort of experiment with masculinity is really freeing for them, but it's also a formative moment because it proves to them that people won't always assume they're female at first glance, which is huge. Having the realization that your body doesn't necessarily have to tell the story you always thought it would is so powerful, so I really appreciated that moment. There's also this really nuanced distinction about how even though Anna doesn't necessarily claim femininity for themselves, doesn't mean that feminine things are bad. You can be more masculine without hating or rejecting feminine things. And I think that's something a lot of people don't understand about being non-binary, that being NB doesn't mean you hate or resent traditionally gendered things or things coded as feminine or masculine. It doesn't mean you don't identify with those things or contain some of those things. It just means you understand those ideas are arbitrary and you are not defined by them. There's also really interesting parallels between figure skating performance and gender performance. So this idea that when you step out onto the ice, you are performing a character, you are presenting something to the audience and the judges, and the more you lean into that role, the more points you get. That's also how gender performance and gender presentation works. We are conditioned to walk, talk, and act certain ways depending on what gender we're assigned at birth, and everything from what we wear to how we speak either skews that or reinforces that. Because Anna is assumed to be this one thing, they're expected to want certain things, to like certain things, to be certain things, and when they're around other people, they're meant to perform to those expectations to get a passing grade so no one suspects anything different. And there's a really interesting counterpoint with their coach Alex, who's a queer man, but who was known for his romantic performances with his skating partner, which is almost expected when it comes to male-female duos, and like that's a whole other conversation about heteronormativity we can have another time. So Anna's like, okay, well, is it just accepted that we play different roles on the ice, and is it possible for me to disassociate in that way from my own performance? So the story, in essence, questions where we draw the line between acting and expressing, and what a skater's responsibility really is in that sense. But like I said, it doesn't just go for skating, it goes for gender as well. So yes, I'm super invested, very appreciative of seeing all these little things that make Anna do a mental double take, and I just want to love them and protect them with all I have and let them know it's going to be okay. So I'm very eager to see where the story goes. I did also read a little bit more of Fence Striking Distance, and I think it's just so much fun and such a sheer delight. It just feels like a little reward, a little love bundle for fans of the Fence series. Nothing too serious is going on, but these beautiful, wonderful idiot boys are on full display, and it's hilarious to see them fumbling through just the most basic interactions between friends. Like Coach Williams tells them to start sitting together in the cafeteria, but Seiji has no idea how breakfast works, and it's fun to see them try and figure out the whole table dynamic, like who sits where and who saves other people's seats. I was flipping through the table of contents and I noticed that we're only going to be getting 4 POVs in this book from Aiden, Harvard, Seiji, and Nicholas. I definitely see them as the main characters in the comic anyway, so I'm not too mad about it, but I am a little bit bummed that we won't get like a Bobby chapter or a chapter from Eugene, because I think there's other teammates like those two who do have distinctive storylines and voices. Again, I just feel like the relationship dynamics and group dynamics are played perfectly, whether it's Seiji blatantly insulting someone and not realizing it, or Eugene running around trying to catch everyone during their trust fall exercises. It just feels pitch perfect. Like I said, no major plot developments or thematic overtones to discuss quite yet, but I'm hoping after this I can really dig in and see what there is to see, so wish me luck. So here we are again, and I thought I would start today by talking about Fence Striking Distance just to shake it up, keep it fresh, but also because I read a huge chunk of the story yesterday and like more than doubled my page count. So like I have a lot of feelings, a lot of thoughts. At this point in the story, we're getting deeper into the relationship dynamics, deeper into all the ways these teammates spend so much time together but still so often miscommunicate. What I appreciate is that this story operates on 2 different levels. On one hand, there's all these amusing team building shenanigans, but on the other hand, you're seeing that there's actually a need for them to grow not only as a team but as friends. So you see the ways these characters often talk past each other and don't understand each other at all, which is usually played for laughs and super hilarious, but then you also see how they can pinpoint things that no one else sees. There's a little bit of dissonance there, and I'm really curious to see how they're going to come out of that by the end of the book, like if there's going to be a set resolution or just hints at other things to come in the series. We're also getting a bit deeper into the tragic backstories, like Aiden's playboy father cycling through engagements and marriages, Harvard dealing with his dad's illness, Nicholas growing up poor and feeling like he's never enough, and Seiji's relentless drive to be the best even if it keeps him at a distance. And I think that's the connection to the title, that these fencers keep their teammates at arm's length, and how scary it is to let people in close enough to be in striking distance. So there's still a lot of humor, there's still a lot of heart and endearing idiocy, but there's so much more happening beneath the surface. I also feel feel like a reoccurring theme is this idea that just because you lose or make mistakes doesn't mean you have to be defined by those things. So I'm really enjoying it. I am deeply invested. I am deep in my fence feels right now and just loving everything this story is giving to me. And also, it contains 4 words I did not know it contained, but I am so glad it does. And those 4 words are fake, dating, kissing, practice. So that's where we're at right now, and I'm feeling a lot of things. On a very different note, Anna on the Edge continues to be the absolute peak of queer middle grade, and Jocelyn and I are loving it so much. This last section was actually a really heartbreaking one because Anna is questioning themselves more than ever before and trying to figure out how they can express what they're feeling to their friends and their mom, and feeling terrified that they'll be shrugged off or that people won't believe them. And sadly, that fear is well-founded and one that many trans kids have to face. But there was also a bit of gender euphoria as well, because Anna discovers the existence of neopronouns, asks someone not in their inner circle to just call them Anna, and also discovers more about non-binary identities on the internet. That last one is, again, hashtag relatable, because so many queer kids have the internet to thank for their lives, and have the internet as their only honest and unbiased resource. The challenging of gender roles continues to be so organic in the way the story is written, and Anna is slowly but surely developing that awareness. There was a really great moment when they went over to Hayden's house and they thought they were going to spend the afternoon doing boy stuff, but then they were like, whoa, wait, hold up. I don't even know what boy stuff is. And that's further complicated when they find out that Hayden is into cosplay and that he's a boy who loves to craft and sew, and there's also girls who love sports and comics. So like, what are any of us doing? And I also really appreciate, again, the realism in how Anna assumes that discovering that they're non-binary is going to be the answer to all their problems and fix everything in their life, when it won't, and it doesn't. It actually makes your life harder in some ways because you know exactly who you are, but the outside world makes other assumptions and defaults on your behalf, and those things you can't control seem even more pronounced and prominent. So I'm really anxious for Anna to come out as their true self if the time is right for them to do so, and again to see how that affects their program and their future on the ice. The writing is really accomplishing everything it sets out to do and more, and Jocelyn said it so well that AJ Sass is so good about taking the internal conflict and making it external and really pushing it into the forefront. There's so many layers to the writing and the character development, and I'm really just appreciating every second I spend with this book. So we're actually on track to finish Anna on the Edge today when I'm filming this, so I hope my soul is ready for how the story ends.
In 2018, I cite this stat all the time because it's egregious and I want everybody to know. In 2018, CCBC released the numbers for diversity in kidlit, and out of like 21 or 22 titles in which a Black girl was the main character, over the course of 3 years, there was only one book with a Black queer girl as the main character, right? That was the context that I was writing this book in, that there weren't a lot of stories with girls that had identities that were the same as mine. And so I wanted in this book to, if I only got one shot to write a book, I never got another one after this, then I wanted to make sure that it was clear that Black girls who grow up in relative poverty or grow up in towns in which people don't understand them have a vision of what is possible, and that is joy, and that is love without apology. Also, if the typical all-American girl is white, cis, and straight, then like, let's queer that up a little bit. Let's make her Black and poor and anxious and very, very queer.
Alright, so I'm a clown and I have no self-control, so I actually finished both books. And let me just say, finishing one of these books on the best of days would have decimated my emotions, but the combination of them, the 1-2 punch of these books together, is just beyond words. So let's start with Anna on the edge. And I will say, when I read that last sentence, I was full to the brim with elation and pride and love, and I definitely had to take a moment to put the book down and hide underneath my bed sheets so I could just really soak in and appreciate the impact. It's overwhelming to think about what it means to have this kind of story in the realm of middle grade and how it's going to affirm things for so many young readers that so many of us never got to see until much later in life. And to just think about how that's going to affect the trajectory of their lives and their well-being, it brings me so much happiness. Before I get into the actual discussion, I should also mention that Anna hasn't really made a choice about pronouns by the end of the story, and she's trying out multiple pronouns actually, so I'm going to be using she, her for this last section, which is what she's requested her mom and her best friend use for now. So the story is kind of bookended by two different performances, one that shows Anna's former self and one that shows her truer self, and I really appreciated that. The stakes are very different for Anna's final performance, and it's in a much different context, and I really enjoyed seeing that kind of callback. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I also appreciate how Anna's final performance is made possible by all these different people in her life who believe in her and want to see her do well and who want to be a part of her story. So to see that positive support system was really nice. This last section was also kind of hard to read though, because Anna basically comes out like 3 times in a very short space. And as someone who's gone through that multiple times, it never really gets easier to see, and it always makes me just a little bit anxious. Luckily, the reactions for Anna were generally positive ones, and it was nice to see people, especially authority figures, taking Anna seriously and respecting what she had to say, because not everyone gets that. I didn't really get that, which pains me to say, but it's true for so many trans folks. So I think AJ Sass did a really good job of cultivating and creating this supportive, safe environment for Anna, and even though it does fall a little bit on the idealistic side for me, I still think it's so important for young readers to see in stories. Related to that, my other main critique, if anything, was that I wanted more from the conversations between Anna and her mom, especially after Anna has come out. My thing is, most people, parents especially, are starting from zero when someone comes out to them as non-binary. It's not talked about, it's not common knowledge, it's barely in the media, so a lot of people know next to nothing about what non-binary means or what it can look like, so there's usually a lot of questions. Anna's mom doesn't ask any questions really, just goes straight into support mode, which again is nice to see, but I also think it would have been equally important to see Anna take all of those thoughts, which had been mostly internal, and put them into conversation, because that is the hard part, and that's why it's such a valuable practice. My theory is that AJ Sass didn't want to get lost in the weeds of Anna defining herself or explaining herself too much so that readers wouldn't conflate her non-binary experience with the non-binary experience, whatever that is. So the intellectual part of my brain understands why it happened the way it did, but the emotional NB part of my brain just wishes we had sat in that discomfort just a little bit more. So again, the actual final scene is a little bit open-ended, but a lot of really valuable conversations have at least started by the end, and the story really gives you a reason to hope for Anna, which is so great. Even though I wasn't fully satisfied in some respects, I appreciate the open-endedness of that final scene because it really leans into the unknown and the indefinite. It shows us that things are not always clear-cut, and that just because you don't understand something or can't see the whole picture doesn't make it meaningless. The space between the known and the unknown has purpose. It just felt like the most NB ending to a story ever, and I really enjoyed that. Overall, I would give this like a 4.5 stars, and I highly recommend y'all check it out when it comes out in October. Moving on to Fence Striking Distance, I mean, I don't know what to say besides I love these idiot fencer boys. I believe the official synopsis says this book is the first in a series, and like I said, the 4 POVs are Aiden, Harvard, Seiji, and Nicholas, and I will say that this book does a lot for one of those relationships, but the other one, not so much. Yet? Question mark? I started this book not knowing if or how this story was going to affect the comic series, and I've ended the book still not knowing if and how it's going to impact the comic series. Is this book series like the unseen side stories and backstories of the King's Row Fencers? Is it supplementary storytelling, or will we actually get to see some of these moments crop up as the comic series continues? I don't have any answers. I mean, I hope it's the latter because there's some good stuff in here that I would love to see with my human eyes, but I am not confident that's the case. Can you tell I'm pressed? Because I'm pressed. But anyways, going back to the story itself, the entire book was sort of based on this idea of building teamwork and team sense, and originally it was meant to come from these horribly cliche team building exercises like trust falls and writing personal essays. But what I love is that in order to avoid those exercises, the team ends up concocting their own incredibly stupid bonding experiences. So even though they're very resistant to this idea of spending time together and getting to know each other, they end up doing it anyway on their own terms, and it does end up bringing them closer even though they've just bungled their way through every single step of the process. It's just so funny to me because fencing is so deeply traditional and distinguished, and it boasts such a proud history, and there's so much dignity to the sport that doesn't quite seem to fit with this team when they're off-piste, and I definitely appreciate that dissonance. That's what makes them so endearing and so charming to me, that they are absolute idiots who share one collective brain cell most of the time, but they all share a singular focus and a singular love of fencing for at least a few hours of the day, and honestly, that is just big sports anime energy, which is my brand. So yeah, the story just left me with a feeling of warmth and happiness, seeing these friendships continue to grow, seeing these teammates continue to push each other's boundaries both athletically and emotionally, just really brings me a sense of satisfaction that I can't quite explain. I will say that the story is a little low stakes. There's not any one major conflict that carries the story, and because you have all these different POVs, it's mostly just smaller conflicts. And also what we did get from the backstories felt a little cliche at times and kind of felt reliant on stereotypes. Like how Aiden has become this notorious playboy because his rich dad cycled through wives and never showed him what love was, or how Harvard is as responsible as he is because he had to be there for his family when they were dealing with his dad's illness, or even how Nicholas grew up poor and his mom is this negligent alcoholic. To be clear, I'm not saying that these situations don't happen, but it just feels a bit expected, and even though these things have been hinted at in the series, I kept waiting for the story to take us more into detail than the comics, but I feel like we never quite got there. Did I still love this story with my whole heart? Yes. Did I still laugh out loud an embarrassing amount of times? Yes. Did it still make me want to protect these stupid boys with my life? Big yes. But I can also acknowledge that I wanted a little bit more from it and that no amount of fence content will ever be enough because I'm still eagerly awaiting more comics and hopefully more books in this series. When all is said and done, I would say this one gets about 4 stars, and I think fence fans are definitely in for a treat. So that's a wrap on these 2 queer sports books. I hope this was fun for you to watch because it was fun for me to make, even if it's not the most aesthetic vlog in the world. I don't care. This mess is mine and I love it. If you have any thoughts on either of these books, or if you want to share what you read over this past week, I would love to hear from you in the comments. But that's everything I had for this vlog today. Until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.